Well, the turfhouse originated from a swamp or the bog or the fens, maybe that's the word that we use in Iceland. And it is basically 1,000 years history of vernacular architecture, sophisticated architecture.
A turfhouse is a house, like we mentioned previously, from the swamp. It uses a lot of soil. It uses a lot of root structures, that are formed in the swamp. And these turfhouses is also made out of wood and stones, plants, and then in more recent times, in the 19th and 20th century, other material were actually introduced into the turfhouse, like corrugated iron, steel, cement, and so on and so forth. So and also there were other amendments, made to the turfhouse. So in the 20th century, using those traditional materials like soil and turf, other materials were also introduced into the turfhouse, where they were actually basically an add-ons, part of the development to the turfhouse. So we have examples of turfhouses that have considerable amount of timber, in them, but using turf as an insulation to maybe 1, 2, or 3, or even 4 walls of this timber building. So in a sense, the turfhouse is a very complex architecture, basically also in terms of evolutionary history. And the question is, of course, when is the eradication actually, taking place? It's probably much later than previously has been described. Like we have just mentioned, okay, the last turfhouse was eradicated in the 1980s. But then again, when we maybe scrutinize it further, there are certain elements still that are part of the turfhouse being used in more modern buildings in different forms. So a turfhouse is, like we talk about in our lecture, it is a cluster of houses.
Yeah, there's no blueprint for...
And there is no blueprint. It's a very anarchistic approach to it. Each and every farmer or builder, they just use their own sort of aesthetics, their own notions of utility, of their residency. So we have, based on economic standards, we have houses that are maybe 2 or 3 clustered houses, maybe 1 individual house. But then when we are looking at more affluent homes or turf houses, there are maybe up to 30, 40, even 50 clustered houses with different functionalities. So it's a very, and those clustered houses, they are connected with passageways, corridors basically.
And the main sort of communal area was baðstofa. That's where people were born, slept, worked, and died. So that's like Hannes mentioned in his lecture, that it sort of equivalents the
Japanese tea
room. So it's that is the only space or the area within the house that is identical in these houses. Across these different houses. Baðstofa is the heart of the house, and it seems that was some kind of consensus of how, in terms of size and how the space was designed, that is constant. That's the only part of the house that is sort of constant in that regard. Yeah. Yeah. So no blueprints and we could say anarchist sort of approach.
No house, no turf house was. They were none of them were the same. So we have this very interesting variety of houses. Basically thousands and thousands of varieties of them. And
And Baldur, this main communal area was often built above the where they would store their cattle or sheep, so that generated heat also. But yeah, so it was not just a cohabitation and co-production with the plants and the roots and soil and insects and microbes, but also lice and mice and cows and sheep, and it was all co-produced and cohabited.
Yeah.
And that's also the reason why we like to approach it as an animal, as a creature, instead of a house. It is much more than a house. So that's why we sort of we look at it as a species.